happy Sunday night. It is a pleasure to be with you. My name is Wes Seiler, and I am the host of The Breaking Conservative and one of our best shows, Refounding Fathers. I love doing this show. It's the chance to be able to talk to someone who comes from a different perspective, and you're going to see that borne out tonight. So my good friend Chris Souza is here on the show. Welcome, Chris. It's always good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. We talked a couple times about this. I had COVID over Christmas, and it was terrible in the quarantine and all that stuff, and finally got over it, and then got back to work and all that stuff. And I've been feeling healthy over the past few weeks or so. But now Kyle Walton, our libertarian friend, is not on the show. He's still recovering. So, prayers and thoughts for him because we've been talking to him. He's been on our little chat message telling us that he's doing better, but not quite up to speed. So I miss that guy. I can't wait to get him back. I don't know about you, Chris.
Yeah, me too. I'm really hoping that he'll pull through. He seems like he's doing better, and he's feeling a little bit better. Wasn't feeling quite up to doing the show tonight, but really hope to see him on the next one.
Yeah, I mean, it's all over the map with this COVID thing in terms of the symptoms levels. I mean, I thought mine were bad, and I heard what he went through, and my heart's been going out to him, but I am glad he's doing better. But he had it rough, man. I know you saw the text from him that he had it rough, and some people, they're asymptomatic or they barely have any symptoms at all. The craziest thing for me was I tested positive. My wife had the same symptoms, and she tested negative, and she got tested twice, and it still came back. And then she did the antibody test and still negative, and it's like, well, did I even have it? Because I'm pretty sure I tested positive. So it's still a weird world that we're living in, but overall, it does seem like it's getting better for a lot of people with the vaccine and things like that. So those are good signs, But when it's someone that and care about deeply, like Kyle, and we miss him, and having a friend like that down, it's still very real and very scary for a lot of people. So can't wait to get him back. Hopefully we get him back next week or the week after, but as soon as he's filling up, definitely don't want to rush it, and we'll be checking in with him. So for those folks that are watching live or watching this the day after, be sure to send him a message. Just check up on him, tell him that you're thinking about him, and of course anybody else that is dealing with this. So for tonight, though, it's me versus you. So the liberal versus the conservative, which is always a fun debate. You can't hide anymore, Chris. So I'm coming at you. And now you get to defend the president, given that he is a Democrat and a liberal. That's going to be fun. So that's going to be our second topic. We're going to get into grading Joe, which I think is going to be a lot of fun as we kind of see the next few months play out. And I can't wait to hear your take on it, as well as several people who have been commenting on this. Before we want to do that, I want to talk about Rush Limbaugh. I talked about this on our Wednesday night podcast, and I kind of gave my take. But it's always fun to be able to hear yours, Chris, coming from a completely different perspective on this. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this and how liberals feel about, what's happened with Rush Limbaugh passing away. And I mean, I know Ron DeSantis, the governor in my state, was talking about flying the flags at half-mast for him. I mean, there's so many people who on the conservative movement looked up to him and remembered him, myself being one. And for him passing, it's brought out a lot of those feelings. And I wonder, from the left, I'm curious first for you personally, when I say the name Rush Limbaugh, what comes to mind?
High blood pressure.
I appreciate your honesty.
Both his and mine.
Yeah. So, and with him passing away, what thoughts do you have? Does it affect you in any way? Is it something where you see the good that he's done and there are things that you disagree with and you respect him? Or is this, I mean, to be honest, is this something where you're just relieved that you don't have this, conservative talk show host who is constantly preaching conservatism and leading an enormous amount of people?
Relieved is definitely not the right word. Rush Limbaugh may be gone, but his legacy lives on. And you can take that, however you will. There's no shortage of people in right-wing media today who do very similar things to what Rush Limbaugh did. And in recent years, his star kind of faded a little bit. I think with the election of Donald Trump, who was essentially Rush Limbaugh, formed into an actual politician and an actual elected leader, I think the need for Rush Limbaugh kind of dissipated a little bit. I don't know, maybe it was different on the right, but on the left, I didn't hear a lot about him in recent years, up until maybe the last year when he talked a lot about his diagnosis and then got the Medal of Freedom from Donald Trump. But it seemed like he had basically been kind of replaced by Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, a lot of these guys who, in some ways, sometimes went even more extreme
Hmm.
or maybe targeted the extreme right in a slightly different way with different tactics.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it wasn't really a surprise with Rush passing. We kind of knew that was coming, given what he was dealing with medically, and I think that's a big part of it. Is that when he's going through all these procedures and things like that, obviously the show starts to fade in terms of what he can do for that. But this is a guy. I mean, I remember in the '90s when I was growing up as a kid. I mean, Rush Limbaugh was in every car that I got into. Every adult that was driving was listening to him in the afternoons, and his star was really on the rise. His perspective really galvanized people because when you think about Reagan as the great communicator who is bringing conservatism to the presidency, doing his radio shows and things like that from the White House, and then Rush kind of continued that on and brought it into something that was a daily part of so many Americans' lives. It was this constant feed of his perspective way before even the internet and social media and everything that we have today, and kind of this underground building of the movement. So when I talked on Wednesday, one of the things I brought up was this quote, which comes from a speech, and I'll kind of enlarge this so folks can see it. Um, but you see here, this was Rush Limbaugh defining conservatism, and he was saying, "Who are conservatives? What is the conservative movement?" And this was 2009. I mean, this was over 10 years ago. He was saying this when Obama was president and had just taken the presidency, and conservatives were kind of asking themselves, "Where do we find the movement today?" He said, "Let me define it. Let me tell you who we conservatives are. We love people. We love the people of this country, and we want this to be the greatest country it can be." And on Wednesday, I talked about this. I talked about how in that speech he goes on to say that we want people to thrive. We want people to have choices to live their life how they see fit. If they want to excel academically, then that's great. Let them do that. If they want to focus on a trade, and not go to college, they want to go to that directly after high school, let them do that. If they want to take a completely different direction with their life, let's leave it up to them, as opposed to funneling them through some type of strata, some type of pre-decided government program that tells them exactly what they should and should not want. It's kind of allowing that diversity of life that comes from freedom, um, as opposed to some of the hateful rhetoric, as opposed to the xenophobia, racism, or bigotry that so many liberals and moderates and other opposition to conservatives constantly seem to call us. And I remember being at that speech in the audience. I was just a few rows back, and that place was going nuts. I don't think I've ever quite seen anything like it. Is that almost every single sentence the guy was saying, especially at this part of the speech, was just like standing ovation after standing ovation. It was almost exhausting after like a couple hours of that. And the speech is online. It's on YouTube, and it really defined the movement. And people still talk about it even today. And especially with him passing, so many folks went to this. What do you make of that? Is that the conservative movement that you've seen? Is that what you think of conservatives? And what do you make of Rush Limbaugh being the person to deliver those remarks?
I think he's absolutely the wrong person to deliver those remarks. I could go watch a very rousing speech about how great dogs are, but if that speech is given by Michael Vick and Cruella DeVille, I'm not going to be very moved or persuaded by that.
Hmm.
Rush Limbaugh, before Donald Trump, I think was the primary person responsible for the characterization of conservatives as being motivated by hate, being motivated by bigotry. And you're right, not all conservatives are motivated by those things. I'm sure many are motivated by love and compassion and deep, abiding principles. But Rush Limbaugh was not. Rush Limbaugh made it very clear what he thought about families like mine. I was raised by a single mother. We were on food stamps. We received welfare. I got the free lunch program. The only reason I was able to go to college was because of programs like FAFSA. And Rush Limbaugh made it very clear multiple times what he thought of people like me.
Yeah.
He was racist, misogynist, homophobic, and I don't say these things to bash the dead. I do say them because I think it's important when someone of this stature dies that we do take an honest look and accounting of their legacy.
Mm.
And I frankly don't think a few quotes about love and compassion are anywhere near enough to make up for the amount of evil and toxicity that he inculcated a generation with.
Because I think that what resonated with people who were listening to that speech was that that is how they see themselves. That I mean, that's how I see myself as a conservative. Is when I advocate for things um, like the freedom to be able to choose. Right? It is specifically for people to be able to determine things in their life. And when there is this notion of, hey, you've got to go to college and you need to have the government and then ultimately the taxpayers pick up your debt because that's exactly how progress occurs, it seems to be very much um, pre-decided that this is the right way to go. And so many people are falling into that trap. Now, if you make that choice and then you say, okay, I'm going to take on this debt and I've got a plan to pay it off, then there are consequences for your actions. But this alternative where we have this kind of, again, layered view of society where some people are at the top because they went to an Ivy League school. That makes them somehow better than everybody else because they achieved this, that, or the other. That to me is not the American dream. The American dream is that people had the ability to be able to live peacefully the way that they wanted to. And that, so as a conservative, I don't see myself as, attacking someone who is with that, is in need by taking on the welfare state. I see myself as actually trying to help them. And specifically, that's where charity comes in and actual investment on a personal, deep level. So it is not this hate, right, that it motivates me. And it's the same thing. I think so many conservatives, when they hear these insults that bash them, and I mean, they heard it from Hillary Clinton, they heard it from Obama, I'm sure we'll hear it from Biden, right? It's this notion that that's not how I see myself. Those are not my intentions. And so you're judging me by your perception alone. And I think that's why it resonated with Rush Limbaugh, regardless of how someone sees him personally. Those words mattered because they struck a deep chord in terms of the audience and the people that were motivated at those conferences. So,
Well, I fully agree that you can make those cases against the welfare state, against big government, without coming across as hateful and personal and nasty. And you just did that.
yeah.
Rush Limbaugh did not, and he chose to not do that. So I think for him to kind of go in front of an audience and complain about, oh, liberals and the media, they think that we're all just a bunch of racist bullies. I mean, to me, that's more of Rush Limbaugh pulling his trick of saying deliberately offensive things and then playing the victim when people judged him accordingly.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in terms of how do we make the case going forward for people as from the conservative side in ways that they will understand, and not everybody will, right? Some people are just going to hate conservatives no matter what we say. But I do think that there are ways that we can make the case specifically to communicate our intentions along with what we think is best. And we don't always, I will certainly give ground on that. We don't always do a good job of that. Is when someone says, why are you against the big welfare state? Do you hate people, getting free health care or getting their college, loans pay off? Absolutely not. Like, I want them to do that. I mean, I'll be honest with you, man. I just got through paying off my student loan debt. It took me 10 years to be able to get it. And some people, it's going to take their entire life. Um, and that was tough. That was tough. And I did get some FAFSA support, but I still had a lot of debt on my own. But one of the things that it taught me was to be much smarter in the future in terms of going into debt. My wife and I were talking about renovating our pool, and we were looking at the options, and there was everything from $5,000 to $50,000 or more. And I'm like, listen, I don't want to jump into this debt because I'm going to be responsible. And I think that sense of personal accountability, responsibility is something that is precious. It allows you to get out of debt because let's say that somebody gets all of their student loan debt just covered the way that AOC wants. And then they just move on like, oh, sweet. Why don't they pull that for mortgages? Why don't they pull that for all of their health care? Why don't they pull that for any type of debt that they encounter in their life? Like, how do we know that someone's not going to take advantage of that? Because we know in our hearts that's a huge part of human nature. And so it's this balance, in terms of personal responsibility and some like floor to be able to help people that truly are the worst off. And I think we can communicate that as conservatives better. And there were times that I fully believe Rush Limbaugh did a great job at it. This is one. This is one. And that's what I choose to celebrate. And I would do that for anyone. We've talked about on this show numerous different people. You can talk about MLK or Herman Cain or whomever, right? When we look at them, we try to sort out the good and the bad, the same thing that we would do for ourselves. And then I hope when I pass someday that someone at least takes the time to acknowledge the good before all the mistakes that I've made. So that's what I'm doing with Rush Limbaugh. That's why I brought him up, and that's why I chose to focus on this speech. So a lot of fun. Now dissecting someone else who is living, so I don't have to play as nice, is Joe Biden, who has now been
Close,
president
close to
for
the end, maybe. But yes, he is still living.
for now. So no, but this will be fun. Being able to kind of look at the first month, and it's still early in his presidency, but this guy has done so much since taking office that I feel like there is enough to be able to get some kind of preview and hear some thoughts on this. So I put out the post a couple of days ago of what do we think of Joe Biden's presidency so far? And I've gotten quite a few comments on this. Here's some of them. As I said, give me a grade on this. And Rick says, is there anything worse than an F minus? Like, I'm pretty sure like that's pretty close to a zero. Doug said F because of the pipeline. And then there was a comment here from Sean that I really liked that had some nuance to it, and I'll enlarge this and read it to you. Sean said, D plus at best, a record number of executive orders justified only by the need to undo the misdeeds of the bad orange man is not leadership. I've yet to see him take actual meaningful positions on anything that isn't either sniveling appeasement to the radical left fringe of his party or defining opposition to Trump. Despite his vacuous calls for unity, his actions thus far have shown quite the opposite. Time will tell if he's capable of more. And I was like, man, that guy knows how to read my mind, because that's kind of where I've been. So very eloquent response, in my opinion, Sean. But what we can do on this show is go in a little bit of detail, and we kind of agreed on these categories earlier today of kind of breaking down our grade into leadership. How's he doing on leadership? The economy. Obviously, we're going to attribute economic growth or decline on the presidency because they're so involved in leading the country and have been for decades, that office. And then ideology, and kind of what we mean by this is what's their legacy going to be? What are they following in terms of their belief system? And then rhetoric, which is not always the same. You were just talking about how, you see Rush Limbaugh as talking one way, but then his ideology, deep down is different. So we get the chance to be able to grade Joe Biden on similar criteria. So I'm looking forward to your grades, which I think you just sent me. So let's take a look at those, and then you get to defend them. So this is shocking to me, because I thought you were going to have A's across the board. I mean, this is your guy, right? Like, here comes the moderate Democrat to be able to save the world. And it looks like you gave him a B for leadership, no grades for economy or ideology. Too soon, I guess. You can explain that one. And then a C for rhetoric. So feel free to explain, sir.
Well, so for leadership, I think I really have to go back to Sean's comment about the executive orders and combating, Orange Man bad. I think, like the Orange Man was really bad. For one thing, he was orange, which is an objectively bad color to be, and one that he chose. But in more serious leadership angles, yes, he's signed a lot of executive orders so far. A lot of those were undoing moves that Trump made. Trump made a very big mess in his 4 years in office, which was predictable given that he had no political skills and wanted to do objectively crazy things. I think his overturning the executive order banning people from 7 Muslim majority countries was definitely necessary and justified. I think getting us back into the Paris Climate Accord and quite a few other reversals of Trump policies were necessary just to kind of clean up the mess and wash off the stink. But I also was kind of surprised today when I looked up some of his other executive orders to see how nonpartisan they were and how many could actually be embraced by conservatives. And I did have to look them up because I have to admit, like, I haven't thought a whole lot about Biden since he's been president, which is kind of what I elected him to do, to like be a president that I didn't have to think about every day and like who wouldn't tweet all the time and like try and get all the attention to himself. But here's some of the executive orders that Biden has passed that I think could be embraced by conservatives. One of them was just a memo. A lot of these executive orders are like symbolic and they don't actually do anything. One of them was a memo about the rise in discrimination against Asian Americans. And that is an issue that conservatives have brought up, especially as it relates to affirmative action programs and how those often shut Asian Americans out while favoring other minority groups. One of his executive orders strengthened Buy American rules. Trump was all about buying American, that kind of economic nationalism, populism, that could appeal to that. He signed an executive order ending the government's contracts with private prisons. That plays into Trump's criminal justice reform agenda. He established an Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, which goes into what you were just saying about wanting private charities to have a lot more to do with strengthening our communities, accelerating vaccine production, testing capacity, and guidance for reopening schools. So those were some executive orders that I thought were not pandering to the extreme left. Obviously, there are some that are more controversial, such as they mentioned the Keystone Pipeline, which does have majority support according to most polls, but is disfavored by a lot of conservatives. But I do think that his executive orders, even though there are a lot of them, were a mixture of some partisan agenda, some cleaning up Trump's messes, but also some nonpartisan, bipartisan stuff that we can all get behind.
Sure. So let me give you my grade, and I'll respond to some of those comments, and then we can go from there. So some folks said D, D minus, F. Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at as I break this thing down. Is I said D for leadership, economy, and ideology, and I thought about putting some minuses on pluses on there, but hey, it's a D. It's a failing grade. Rhetoric, I said, was a C, and I'll get into that. But let me kind of explain why. Is when you talk about the executive orders that he is doing, it's not so much that I disagree with the majority of them. I think like 19 of them were about COVID-19 response, okay? Like that's a good thing. In Florida, we've been pretty amazing in terms of our COVID response, and it's been working. And so the leaders should be actively engaged in COVID response. So that's fine. Trump has done a lot, stimulus payments, the whole thing. He's been a leader on a lot of different things in terms of COVID. So I get that. But Biden has taken the practice of executive orders to a new level. He's done over 50 in his first month, which Trump and Obama did less than half of that. And this is the key point, he's doing that when he has Democratic control of the House and with the vice president control of the Senate. And I think that, to me, is what is shocking about this, is when you have kind of the left control of Congress as well as the presidency, why do it this way except to try to make a point, except to try to embrace the practice itself? You could easily, I think, get many of these measures through, and granted, it may take a little bit of time, but through Congress and through the Senate, which is how legislation is supposed to be. You have an emergency situation, the COVID stuff, I get it. But 50? That's insane. That's insane. And that's not a unified way to lead. So that's a D in my book. The economy absolutely is a D as well. Could it be worse? Potentially. I mean, there's some things that he's done. He's pushing back against the far left in terms of student loans and things like that. So, it's not a complete F, but the Keystone Pipeline is pretty bad. And members of his administration trying to defend his move is equally bad, because you're not going to take someone who's been involved in this work for decades of their life and then just tell them, hey, you know what, go get a green job. Just go relearn your entire profession and go compete with college graduates, even though you're 20 years older than them. It's just entirely disrespectful to people who have built this country. Ideology is a D simply because rhetoric is a C. Because this guy ran on unification and trying to heal the country and all of that. And those are things that, like, I feel like we needed some. There were times that I wanted Trump to have more rhetoric that way, to be able to extend more grace and compassion and compromise to liberals, and he didn't do that. Biden talked about those things, but in terms of his ideology, it doesn't seem like he's following that. It seems like what he's actually practicing is to get as close to the far left as he possibly can without completely losing moderate Democrats as opposed to conservatives themselves. I didn't think he was going to get much of a fair shake in terms of, how conservatives see him. I wasn't planning on giving much of that myself, so I can understand some of the challenges here, but I wonder how long this is going to work for him, governing this far to the left. And he's spent his entire career trying to navigate some type of middle ground, and I don't see that at this point. Maybe he feels like he has to prove himself to the left, but that's going to get a failing grade in my book. So that's where we are. I do think it could be worse. It could be a whole lot better, but we'll see. Maybe we can look at this in a few months and see where we are. So that's Grading Joe. Let us know your comments on this as we start to close out the show. It's going to be fun. I can't wait. We're going to have Kyle's take on this when he gets back here in a week or two. So that'll be interesting to see how he sees him and compares him to Trump. And then we're open to any topics that you want us to discuss on this show. We love to debate clearly and go back and forth. So don't forget to follow us in terms of our Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Subscribe to those. Our website, thebreakingconservative.com. You can see all of our past episodes. And then, Chris, I want to give you the last word here. We've had an awesome discussion today talking about Rush Limbaugh to Joe Biden to our different perspectives on the whole thing. So go ahead, brother. Take that last comment.
Yeah, I think you mentioned he's trying to prove himself to the far left. I think he's also proving himself to the right, that, he's not going to be this loud bully, but he is going to walk softly and carry a big stick. He's not going to be an empty suit. He's going to kind of quietly get a lot done. And it might be stuff that, the right doesn't want done. But to Joe Biden, it's necessary. I do think that even though I gave him an incomplete grade for the economy, it's very likely that Biden will preside over a much better economy than the Trump years. Part of that is just because of recovery from a pandemic was going to happen no matter what. But I do think Trump's handling of the pandemic really extended it and extended the damage. And we're going to see another blip in the trend of the past 30 years, which is Republican administrations kind of leaving behind an economic downturn and a Democratic administration bringing the economy back.
Yeah, the only thing I would say to that is the more Joe Biden challenges conservatives, the more he gives them something to rally against. We've talked about the civil war within conservative circles right now, the Nikki Haley versus, Donald Trump divide. Where's Mike Pence in that? When it comes to a president governing from the far left, that's something they all agree on that they don't like. So it's going to be interesting. The more he does that inspire conservatives to join back together within, a year or two of the very next election. So we'll see. But anyway, thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for being on the show. Love the perspective of the debate going back and forth. Let me know what you think, who you side with on this, and how you would grade Joe Biden. And we will see you on our next shows. We've got Conservatism on Tap. That's going to be right after this. And then on Wednesdays, we are going to have our solo podcast. So send in questions for that. And then Chris and I, and hopefully Kyle, will see you next Sunday. Have a great night, and I'll see you then, Chris.
See ya.